Welcome to this session masterclass on taming the compliance beast. As we all know that handling compliance is pretty complex task today. And if you look at the overall compliances from RBI, there is a lot of industry pressure. And also, it's not just about the cyber security per se, but there are other governance compliances as well. If you talk about the other compliances like ICOFR, internal control over financial reporting, each and every compliance today has some or the other information security related controls embedded in it. Okay. So even though the main focus is information security today, there are other aspects and there are other parallels that we'll also be covering. So it's not just about the pure play infosec, but it is also about focusing on how to meet the other allied compliances and other regulatory requirements as well. Okay. Can we move on to the next slide? Thanks. So the most important part when you are talking about compliances, the first thing that comes to our mind is what gets applied to us. Now, what get applied to us, what compliances we should meet, completely depends on where we stand, what are our business sector, what is the positioning of our product in the industry and the overall payment chain. Okay. Now, if you want to identify where we stand, okay. Now, basically, let's say if you are if you are a payment aggregator. Now, just saying that you are a payment aggregator, it doesn't end there. There are other aspects that you need to cover. So the other attributes of in understanding what gets applied to us, what are exactly our role when it comes to compliance and all, we can focus on four key parameters. One is our industry and sector. What are the competitors? What compliances competitors and the industry leaders are following? Vendor, suppliers, and partners, which specifically talks about we have some SLA, we have some agreements. So in such a case, we have some due diligences, we have some expectations from our partners and stakeholders as well. So what we are doing to meet those requirements? Okay, our customers, definitely today there is a lot of focus on the customer security, customer privacy, and the data protection, which is the data which is fed by the customer, and even understanding and protecting the customer behavior. So there are a lot of controls. Today, regulations say the regulations are also putting a control on what you should be able to see about the customer, what you should not be able to see about the customer. Okay. Now, there is a complete shift in when we based on a product placement. Let's say you are part of fintech. Let's say you are part of a payment processing organization, and your product is serving a payment aggregator. In that case, you are actually have zero visibility into what is getting purchased. You will be able to understand the merchant category, to whom the payment goes, what type of purchase it is, but you do not have a specifics of the purchase that are being made. Okay. So this is precisely where the complete the shift in the visibility also changes the expectations of the regulators and the other bodies who are trying to control your visibility into data and who are trying to secure the information as well. Last but not the least is the geographies in this area. So as we all know, we had some time back a draft privacy bill. It was taken back in the parliament, retracted, and definitely there will be a new bill that will be coming into play. And once that gets enforced, we'll have a complete clarity. But the draft bill has given us a fair amount of idea what data we need to monitor, maybe not how to monitor and what to do exactly to meet the regulatory requirements, but we now have some fair expectations, understanding of the expectation from the regulator as well. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? So once we know what are our industry sector, what are the expectations of our partners, vendors, customers, and then our due diligences from the regulatory standpoint, geographic regulatory standpoint, now we can select what is best applicable to us and what is not applicable to us. The three main areas that trouble us most is the sectoral compliance or industry best practices. Best case example is the payment card. If you are into a business which processes a payment, by default, definitely you should meet to the requirements of PCI DSS, which is payment card industry benchmark today for payment card data security. Okay. Now, laws and regulation which are specific to technology and there are also specific to geography as well. When it comes to protecting the data of consumers, one of the great example that we have today is CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act. Not just that, this is just pertaining to from the online e-commerce segment. When you talk of any, if you are into the health sector, if your payment application supports health like lab checks, etc. So you may not have a complete visibility, but then you still will be have some visibility into what the where the expenses are going. Sometimes in that case you may have to comply to some regulatory requirements of HIPAA and other things as well, if at all you are serving into that geography. Now, when it comes to Indian geography particularly, there are no regulations as such. One of the regulatory expectations that we had sometime back in February 21, we saw RBI Master Direction on Digital Payment Security Controls. That is one of the technology related regulatory instructions from RBI. Last but not the least, as we spoke about in this area, is laws and regulations which are not directly related to technology. They are not directly related to our business, but they are in general. They are the hygiene of complete overall industry practices like ICOFR, as we spoke about, internal control over financial reporting, and some acts like Companies Act. Then there are other acts which are like IT Act. If you are using any IT enabled services, or if you are providing any IT enabled services, the first expectation from the industry or the regulator is that you comply to IT Act requirements. Okay. Now once we have assessed where we stand, where our industry position is, and what could bother us. Okay, let's look at some example how in which ways it can bother us. Can we move on to the next slide? So once you know that regulatory practices are there, what you need to comply, you also should be familiar with how it could impact. Okay, the most important aspect of not complying to a particular requirement is like it becomes a blocker for our growth. Now, I can give you multiple examples pertaining to that. Let's take an example. If you are not complying to PCI DSS requirements and you want to launch any application pertaining to payment card data processing or payment card payment processing. Now, in that case, sometimes your growth, or forget about growth, sometimes you can't even look out for clients until unless you are certified. Okay. Now the first question that comes from the investors is that are you meeting to all those industry practices? Are you compliant to all those requirements? Okay. The next is non-compliance to regulatory practices could also attract some investigations, audits, and etc. Now, today we have one clear-cut example which gives us which gives us a kind of a jitter into the industry completely. Some time back, we have seen an instruction from RBI, a circular from RBI, saying that the forex foreign exchange providers, which are not meeting regulatory requirements. So around 34 such forex exchange providers were there, and it definitely must have impacted their business. Even though regulator has not asked for any particular instructions or not initiated in audit to investigate their businesses and their business processes, but it definitely is a strong message from the regulator. If you are not meeting to the compliance requirements, if you are not meeting to the basic expectation and hygienes of the industry, then definitely you will face the actions from the regulator. Last but not the least, one thing about compliances is that you cannot get compliant at the nth moment. Compliance is generally kind of a journey. You have to begin. You take some baby steps and all with small actions, and those actions mature over a period of time. Now the question is how you can squeeze the time, how you can reduce the time to get certified, and how you can reduce the time to get to reach to the certification in all. Now there is always a limit when it comes to squeezing the time. You can do parallel audits, you can do parallel checks, you can do evidence gathering to get complied and all. But at the end of the day, if you want to get a proper certificate from the reputed auditor, in such a case, there is always a time that you have to take out, that you have to invest, that your team has to look into to meet those compliance practices. to create those records, to set up those practices, to follow those practices and all. Okay. Now, these are the basically troubles that we face. Now, let's look at how we can easily sail through all these issues and easily reach to the our goal, that is having a good compliance or meeting to a particular requirement. Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So here is the journey, probably kind of the last, like the second half of our presentation here. Okay. So this second half completely focuses on what we need to do in order to have a good compliance. Now, when I say good compliance, a good compliance ensures both the things. You are certified, and it also ensures that you are having a good visibility and good control over what runs in your organization. Now, if you want to have a better compliance or a kind of a synced compliance, when I say sync compliance, what do I mean by sync compliance is your document and your practices both reflect each other. That is what I mean by synced compliance. Okay. So if you want to have such a harmonious environment, okay, what you can simply do is you can begin with the simple documentation. Now, the principal things that you can follow while documenting the processes and the practice in your organization is use graphics, use pictographical representation as much as possible. Now, I'm not just me that is saying that. If you look into the RBI master direction, the master direction also says that the regulated body, the body who's processing the payment or is hosting any digital payment application, should depict the complete transaction flow, the journey, the start and end of the transaction in a graphical manner. Now, using this graphical means and methods will basically make it less language independent. Okay. At least people are able to sync up with the flow. They'll understand what precedes what. Okay. What follows what actions are following and what it leads to. Now, this also helps when if your customers are bothered, customers are not clear about, let's say there are some issues, there are some complaints, okay, and if you have a public documentation which talks about how the processing happens, okay, in that case definitely you will be able to convince your customer that they have to wait until the processing reaches some XYZ state. Okay. So now these things, the such kind of transparent documentation helps quite a lot. Okay. You can use diagrams, you can use color coding. Now there is one color coding which is promoted even by US government in while documenting the system information is TLP, traffic light protocol. Now, as we have document classification or information classification, we can actually use color coding to depict the classification. As an example, if you have a very confidential document which is shared, which needs to be shared within only the project group, okay, you can use an amber color, something that is very crucial, very restricted document which very few people in the organization have access to. In such a case, you can use a red color. So it's a very simplistic approach. Okay. And this basically syncs in with your existing control, so you don't have to change anything to comply to these things, what I'm talking about. Now, apart from documentation, you can also start logging the events and the activities that happens in your product and your services. Now, why this is most important? Definitely, we all know the the audit logs in financial environment. The audit logs play a crucial role. But apart from that, the important events will help you investigate an incident. Okay. Now, while you are investigating an incident, just the financial audit logs won't help. The behavior of the application is also much more important rather than just the transaction. Okay. Because today we work with such a complex technology, so let's, in case if we do not have a appropriate amount of logs with us, then it becomes very difficult to go back and recreate the environment which actually led to an incident. Okay. One most important thing about the logs is that we also have to check on a consistent basis that what is getting logged. Now, when I said important event and important information, that information should not be pointing to a customer. Okay. Now, when we are talking about the information that is getting logged, one of the safest approaches, wherever there is data getting logged, be it in transaction related data, transaction statuses, transaction number. It may or may not contain PI for that matter. PI definitely you should not log. That is the principal thing. But if at all there are some environments where you mandatorily need such kind of logs to be preserved, okay, precisely you can put some controls which will protect the logs as in terms of encryption, in terms of masking. You can use you can just ensure that the data is not stored in clear text. So those are the principal things when coming to documentation. Can we move on to the next slide? So when we are talking about apart from documentation, what are other things? Okay, we can use the technologies and tools that we use in our daily routine to meet to record a lot of activities that we do. As an example, you can use Git or a version control system for maintaining your documentation, even your policies, procedures, and even confidential documents. See, code is your bread and butter. The services are your bread and butter. If you are monitoring your services with the help of technology, then definitely you can carry out compliance related activities using the same technology as well. Okay, so you can use Git as you use Git for development. You can use Git for document maintaining the documents as well. It's kind of prevalent practice across industry. You can use your bug tracking tools, issue tracking tools for tracking audit observations and tracking risk. Okay, so we conduct risk assessments, or let's say even if you are not conducting a full-fledged risk assessment, if you come across some issue which is in your environment, it's not a technology bug per se, but it could bother you in your business, in your growth, or in your processing in the near future, or in the far future. So in that case, you can keep those things documented. Okay, you can debate, you can review those scenarios on a periodic basis. So you can use bug tracking tools for tracking such issues as well. If you are having if you using collaboration tools like Microsoft MS Teams, O365, and Google Workspaces, you can use those environments to create forms. Okay, forms and surveys. Okay, so when you want people to fill in same respond to same set of questions, okay, you may be sending those surveys and questionnaires to your clients, to colleagues, or within your organization for maintaining the compliance. You can create those forms and surveys in the same environment as well. This basically protects that data and keeps that data within the environment and gambit of the collaboration account itself. Okay, you can also make use of reputed open source utilities. There are a lot of utilities for text editing, for data compression, for encryption as well. You can make use of those utilities. Okay, and once you are done with all these basic activities, then you can look at to the certification. Now what happens is when you're looking at the certification aspect, okay, in certification, there are generally two phases that most organizations see. First is the gap analysis, where you identify the issues, and the second phase, you get certified. Instead of that, you can go for a three-phased approach. In that three-phase approach, first is the gap analysis, where you identify the gaps. Okay. Second is you basically go for your compliance assessment, and third is you go for the certification assessment. Now, why? What is difference between getting compliance certificate and getting a certificate? Okay, if you look at ISO kind of certification, ISO compliance certificate and ISO certificate both are different. Okay, ISO compliance certificate can be issued by any organization who knows the standard. Okay, who has studied the standard and who has the capability to assess you. In India, we have a standard benchmark as a certain empanelment. So any certain empanelment organization can give you ISO compliance certificate, ISO 27001 compliance certificate, but not the ISO certificate. ISO certificate can be issued by only select organization who have the privileges, who have the rights from the ISO, from the body itself to issue a certificate. Okay, a regular ISO certificate will have a registration number, should meet its life cycle. So if you get certified, then there are periodic audits. Okay, so that is one of the major things when you're talking about a compliance and a certification. If you are getting a compliance verified, then compliance verification does not need a repeat audit. But if you get certified, to justify your certification, you should also get certified on a periodic basis, and you should get audited on a periodic basis. Okay, Can we move on to the next slide? Yeah. So when we are talking about compliance, the most important aspect about compliance is that the compliance is these compliance activities, these compliance mandates are there to verify three important actions: the intent, action, and evidences. Now, who sets the intent? The regulatory requirements, the laws, regulations, standard. They basically set an objective. Okay, this objective needs to be met. As an example, the standard or the regulatory requirement will never say you need to have centrally managed XYZ malware control product. Okay, the compliance or the industry standard practices will generally say you need to have a malware control. Now it is up to us how to interpret the statement and what to enact in order to meet that requirement. So the standards and the regulatory requirement sets the intent, sets the objective. Okay, what follows? If you want to meet those objectives, what action that you need to carry out? That is precisely the most important part. So these actions completely are based on our interpretation of those requirements. Okay, as an example, when a particular regulatory requirement says that you need to do a background check, okay, of people who are serving in critical area, if at all. Generally it's an industry practice, none of the regulatory requirement says, but it definitely says if you're talking about the physical security service and all those allied areas. Okay, and if you're talking specifically about the data center or anything kind of such protected environments, in that case the background verification matters the most. Okay, now if you are getting a background verification done, now what you actually conduct, what activities you do as part of background check also matters a lot. Okay, now background check can be done with the corporate verification, corporate references verification, the academic checks and all. But there are other list of things that can be done. One is credit check, criminal background check. For some of the people who are serving in the physical security areas, they also need a character verification certificate from the police. So the action is one thing, okay, carrying out a background verification. But there are other allied areas which ask for something more. Same thing when you talk about ISO 27001. ISO 27001 asks for continuous improvement or continual improvement. Now, when you are trying to justify continual improvement or skill improvement of your team, okay, what you do as part of the skill assessment matters most. If you are just doing the same training over and over again, it may not serve the purpose. You may land up you may get a compliance certificate for just showcasing that evidence, but it does not meet the objective. Okay, now in such a case what happens is you do not meet you even though you are able to meet that, you are able to get that box tick, but you are not actually getting the benefits out of it. As an example, if you have a skill matrix, okay, for all your team members, these skill matrix can be tracked over a period of time. And this also gives you an optimal team sizing. As an example, today, let's say I'm working in the audits. Tomorrow I'll be looking into the incidents. Or yesterday, if I was looking into incidents, tomorrow I can looking into the your team. You can have a cross skill team as well. Now, why cross-skill team is also sometimes important. Why you can skill your team more when it comes to security, being particular. In security, if you are, let's say I'm an incident manager, an incident manager should be aware of due diligence practices which are mandated by law. Okay. In such a case, uh, instead of training that person repeatedly onto those regulatory requirements, I may give him a full-fledged course. It may be talking about basic hygiene of due diligences. Okay, then I may ask that person to go through the my vendor agreements as well, so that my person automatically becomes a familiar with the responsibilities when it comes to the due diligence with the vendor. So all these things can be done. So the overall point here is our action should be, there may be one or more actions that we can take, but at the end of the day it should meet the objective, and it should also serve the organization. That is the most important part. Just don't carry out the action for the tick in the box. Okay, last but not the least, always maintain evidences. Now when you are maintaining evidences, always ensure that these evidences will be verified, and the audit output, okay, completely depends on the evidences that we present to the auditor. As an example, if you are doing a periodic activity, let's say user access control, okay, if you have user access control for last 6 months and there are some or other non-compliances, it is still fine. But if you are conducting a user access review once a quarter, and in 1 year you have skipped 1 quarter, so you only have 3 records instead of 4 records, then it calls for the major action. In such a case, what you can basically do is you can reduce the frequency of user access controls. You can have more records. There may be non-compliances. Some people may not be responding. User access or the user access verification sometimes getting delayed. Okay, now this is fine to begin with before you are getting certified, but after you are got certified, you have to continuously stick those periodic activities. Now these periodic activities will generate reports and lot of evidences, and these evidences will justify what action did you take and whether those actions were able to meet those intended goals and objectives or not. Okay. Now, apart from this, some of the regulatory expectations that we have in India, if you are into insurance sector, the IRDAI, IRDAI has rolled out a framework. If you are into the stock brokerage, stock trading and securities, SEBI has a framework for cyber security. For if you are into banks and financial segment, definitely, then RBI is the only body. And if you look at RBI, then my God, there are a lot of instructions from RBI, and RBI is much more inclined towards technology as compared to other regulators. Okay, you can see the change. You can actually look at some of the latest master directions as we spoke about. It is completely technology oriented. So as our businesses are more inclined towards technology, it is very easy for us to align ourselves to meet those compliances. Okay, so when you are trying to meet any particular compliance, okay, you can select a particular standard industry best practice, and you can automatically get compliance to majority of the regulatory practice as well. A best case example that we have in India is we have an IT Act. The IT Act specifically says that every body corporate needs to have reasonable security practices. But Act actually didn't said in the initial days that what are those reasonable security practices. Later point in time, government released a resolution saying that ISO 27001 is one of the benchmark for those regulatory practices. And if you are compliant to ISO 27001, then you are deemed compliant to IT Act. Okay. Now, in general, nobody asks you for IT Act compliance today because it's an open secret now. If you are compliant to ISO 27001, then you are compliant to IT Act as well. If you look some time back, the regulators under Companies Act, they used to conduct IT Act audit as well. But since the government has passed on such a resolution saying that if you are compliant to ISO 27001, then you are automatically compliant to IT Act, majority of the IT Act requirements. Okay. Now, IT Act requirements does not talk, ISO 27001 does not talk specifically about due diligence in IT Act requirements. Okay. But then it can be dealt separately. What we are basically talking here and discussing here is to begin your journey and not take a shortcut in the evidences, but how you can reduce overall effort into getting a compliance. Okay. That's all from me. If you have any questions, we are open for those. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was indeed an enlightening session regarding effectively being compliant as a company. We have a few questions now, which we'd like to take.
So one question that we have is what are the security measures that were taken earlier previously? So actually, the security journey started with ISO 17799. 17799 was the initial standard for information security. It has matured from 17799 to ISO 27001, and now it has completely into new ISO 27000 family of information security certifications. Uh, so most prevalent in the industry is ISO 27001, and as we know, it is well appreciated even by the government of India under the IT Act as a reasonable security practice. Apart from that, there are sectoral guidelines as we spoke about from different regulators. You speak about insurance as we mentioned. Then IRDAI related regulations and directions are there. RBI has lot of separate kind of directions for each and every segment. If you are an urban cooperative bank, there is a different framework for you. Okay. If you are a semi-urban cooperative bank, then there are different requirements for you. But lately, what we have seen is RBI is also getting too much technical in their regulations, and the expectations are that the technology configuration also should be focused and should be as per the requirements from the regulator. Okay. So the how technology needs to be configured. So those controls are also now with the regulator as well. Okay. So answer to that question is ISO 27001. Prior to that, ISO 17799. PCI also matured from standard 1 to currently PCI 4.0 is in the industry, which is for payment card securities. Other regulations get reviewed on a periodic basis, like ICOFR controls. There are some controls which we call it as ITGC, Information Technology General Controls. Those are also getting updated on a periodic basis. So there is no one standard per se, but each and every industry standard, be it business regulation related, be it technology related, they are doing their bit and they are ensuring that there is overall security, there is overall visibility into security of the organization. That is why every regulation today that you see will have some or the other information security related expectations.
We have we can take one last question if you would like. Posted the questions here on your chat window.
Sure. Yeah. Some of the instances that we have seen in past, one recent example is we spoke about the forex organizations. Those are being thrown out of business, not meeting to the compliance. RBI has also taken action on some of the organizations, some of the financial institutions, like loan apps we have seen in the recent past. Loan apps are also under heat. Then credit lines, who are the entities who are providing credit lines are not associated with banks or financial institutions. They are also facing a heat. That is the current scenario as we spoke about. RBI also issued some strong instructions on not to use Indian payment ecosystem to connect to a blockchain. Okay, not to use UPI and etc. To connect to a blockchain. Apart from that, there are some or the other instructions given by RBI and the other regulators as well. The picture in the next 5 years is the regulations will become more and more technology focused. So it will be easy for us technology people to meet those requirements, because since we are dealing with the technology day in day out, it will be easy for us to justify that we meet those certain expectations. So it is becoming less more documented or documentation oriented and more technology oriented. That is how will be the picture tomorrow.
Thank you, sir. That was an enlightening session for all of us. I would like to thank all our esteemed speakers, our moderators, and our audiences. It has been an honor to have you here for the Global Fintech Fest 2022. I would also like to thank our partners, our platinum partners, Google Pay, Phone Pay, Visa, M2P Fintech, Falcon, MasterCard, and our registration partner, NTT Data Payment Services. Thank you so much.